So, in Jujutsu Kaisen, there are dozens of curse techniques, and in this video we're explaining 10 of them that were barely used in the series. Most of these powers only showed up for one specific fight before the user was either killed or just sidelined forever. That's why today we're giving some of these techniques the spotlight they deserve, and the first one belongs to Kirara. At Jujutsu High, Kirara is one of the suspended third year students, and the name of her technique is Love Rendezvous. On a very basic level, this power does two main things. First, it can physically stop people from approaching an object or a person of Kirara's choice. Secondly, Love Rendezvous creates a force that pulls things together, and as we saw in Season 3, this force can be used to attack or as just a way to get around. The problem for Kirara is that she can't just do this whenever she wants, because the technique has rules she needs to follow, rules that are related to the Southern Cross. For context, the Southern Cross is a pretty famous constellation that appears on the flags of Brazil, Australia, and a few other countries. In total, the constellation has 5 main stars, and when we look at it this way, you can see that some of the stars are further away than others. The furthest star from Earth is Imai, which we'll call star number 1, the next furthest star is Acrux, which we'll call star 2, and following that we have Mimosa, which is star 3, Ginan, which is star 4, and Gacrux, which we'll call star 5. This order is super important because if you know the order of the stars, then you have at least a chance of beating Kirara, but if you don't know it, then yeah, she might kill you. If we go through the rules step by step, Love Rendezvous allows Kirara to choose one of these stars and then mark someone's curse energy with the star of her choice. From what we've seen, marking is usually done by making contact, like in this moment when she touched Divine Dog. As we know, Divine Dog is literally made from Megumi's curse energy, and so by touching the dog and marking him with star 2, it meant that everything containing Megumi's curse energy also got marked with the same star. What this shows is that Kirara doesn't mark the person, what she's marking is their curse energy. And in this series, everyone has their own unique curse energy. So for instance, Gojo's curse energy is very different from Hakari's curse energy. And that in itself is different from Megumi's curse energy. Like, it's unique to the person. Now, when someone's curse energy does get marked by Love Rendezvous, what it means is that they can't physically get close to people marked with different stars, unless you follow the order of the Southern Cross. As an example, when Megumi summoned his rabbits, which were all marked with star 2, we saw that they genuinely could not get close to Kirara, who was marked with star 4. Even when they surrounded her, the gap simply didn't get any smaller, because when we look at the order, star 2 can't just skip ahead to star 4. What you can do though, is you can interact with the stars directly above you or below you. So in this case, the rabbits had no problem interacting with Panda, who was star 1, and they also had no problem touching the third star as well. As long as you keep following the order without making mistakes, then in theory nothing will prevent you from reaching the final star. The problem is that most people will make a mistake at least once, and this is what triggers the force that we mentioned near the beginning. If we use a hypothetical, let's imagine that Yuta, Megumi, and this pile of rocks have all been marked with star 2. Usually, a pile of rocks doesn't have cursed energy, so for Kirara to mark them, a sorcerer needs to charge them up with CE. For purely strategic reasons, Kirara wouldn't do this herself, because if she did, then she'd also get marked with star 2. In her position, it's better to be marked with a higher star like star 4 or star 5, so that her enemies physically can't get close. That's why, in this hypothetical, she got a random friend to help charge the rocks, and this friend has now left the area. Now, if Megumi was to break the rules by sending one of his Shikigami to Kirara, then eventually, everything marked with star 2 would go flying towards Yuta. As the person with the most cursed energy who's been labeled with this same star, Yuta would be the target even if he didn't break the rules. In this scenario, Megumi, his Shikigami, Rika potentially if she's out, and this pile of rocks, they'd all come crashing into him. If the person who charged the rocks is nearby, then they'd also go flying towards Yuta, but if they're outside the range of Love Rendezvous, which seems to be only this big, then they'd be perfectly fine. In JJK Season 3, Kirara got help from a bunch of different sorcerers, since we know that people charged up the door, this car, this parking stop with cursed energy. We know for a fact it was different people, because at one point each of these items had a different star, and that would only be possible if they each had a different person's cursed energy. In that sense, Kirara is still slightly restricted by the rules of her technique, and to use this power to its full potential, what she needs is help from other sorcerers to charge things up and lay traps, and she also needs prep time as well. What I do love about this technique though, is that even if someone doesn't break the order, even if someone doesn't break the rules, Kirara can still turn them into a victim. For instance, in this specific scene, Panda hadn't done anything wrong, but Kirara was still able to attack him by using one of her traps. In this case, the trap was a car that she marked with star 1 in this moment, and since Kirara herself was star 4, it meant the car was way too close. From a certain point of view, you could say that the car itself was breaking the rules, and so this is what created the force that instantly pulled it away. As the car was then pulled away, we can see it being attracted to Panda since he was marked with star 1 and obviously had the higher curse energy output. Even when he threw the car away, it was still attracted back to him, because the effects of Love Rendezvous sort of work like a magnet in some way, and so the attraction still lasts for a solid amount of time. Anyhow, the last thing to mention about Love Rendezvous is how Kirara used the attractive force of her technique to fly through the air using coins. Not only was this super creative, but it was actually an anime original idea, and unfortunately the way it was presented, it just doesn't make sense. As we can see, the marking on this coin is Gacrux, which is the 5th star, and at this point, Kirara's own curse energy was marked with Ginan, which is the 4th star, something that she even confirms a few seconds later. This creates a problem, because based on the known rules of Love Rendezvous, two things can only be attracted to each other if they share the same star. The fact that this coin still says Gacrux when it's flying through the air, it implies that either this is a mistake in the animation, or Kirara is tapping into a completely unknown rule that we just don't know. However, if we try to explain what's going on by using the known rules of the technique, then I think the general idea is that Kirara throws a coin that she charges with a decent amount of curse energy. After throwing the coin, Kirara herself is then pulled towards it, and when she catches up, she then throws another coin that has more curse energy than the first. Like we explained before, objects and people are attracted to things with the same star that have the highest curse energy output. And so for this to work, each new coin has to have more curse energy than the last, otherwise they'd all go flying backwards. Also, for this pulling force to work, Kirara herself needs to have less curse energy output than the coins that she's throwing, which is a crazy thing, but it is possible I guess, because in the show, we've seen that characters are able to artificially suppress their own curse energy. If we assume that these coins were meant to be marked with Ginan instead of Gacrux, then all of this can make sense. She's essentially throwing coins that have more curse energy output than herself, and that is pulling her towards them. And then when she catches up, she then throws another one that has more curse energy, and then she gets pulled towards that. In that way, it can make sense based on the existing rules. With all that said, it's time to move on to Osada, who's a retired sorcerer from Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. As some of you know, Modulo takes place decades in the future, and at the time of his introduction, Osada was 46. From what we've seen, he lives a pretty isolated life in the middle of nowhere, and the only reason we know about him is because people thought that he was a cursed spirit. For context, in Modulo Chapter 3, it was revealed that Osada's technique is Seance, but it works differently to the Seance we've seen before. For instance, if we look at Granny Ogami, her seance allowed her to shapeshift into the dead or allow someone else to shapeshift into the dead, and in that process, they would gain that person's appearance and physical strength. By contrast, Osada's seance works a lot differently since it gives him the powers of whatever costume he's wearing. The only example we saw is when he was dressed up like a shark, and this allowed him to swim through the air as if he was a shark gliding through the water. On top of that, his sense of smell was elevated to the same level as a shark, hence why he was able to sniff blood from pretty far away. Now, for context, the reason we know about Osada is because in the nearest village to his house, 2 people were killed by an animal. The witnesses said they saw a shark at the scene of the crime, and what's interesting about this is that there's no ocean, no lakes, and no rivers near to where the bodies were found. When Jujutsu High heard about this, they naturally assumed it was a curse, and so they sent a certain character's grandkids to investigate. Their investigation revealed that the victims were killed by a tiger, as in a real tiger that had recently lost its food and water source because of humans. Osada had personally known this tiger since the days it was a cub, and when the murders happened, he was trying to intervene. What Osada wanted to do was bring the tiger to his home, which he claims is pretty far from the village, and yeah, his idea was that he could safely take care of the tiger himself, while at the same time making sure it doesn't hurt anyone else. As a result, what the witnesses actually saw was Osada in his shark form, trying and failing to restrain the tiger. It goes without saying that, on paper, Seance is an amazing technique, because based on what he said, there doesn't seem to be any restrictions or limitations. For all we know, he could put on a Superman costume and turn himself into a special grade threat. Honestly, the possibilities are endless here, but the main problem is that Osada himself isn't that talented. In fact, although he did graduate from Jujutsu High, he was still outsmarted by a wild animal. If you gave this same technique to someone who has talent and is able to work hard, then yeah, it could be amazing. But as things stand, Osada is the potential man of his generation. Anyway, up next we have Yuki Tsukumo, whose curse technique is genuinely a government secret. In volume 23, we found out that Yuki's power is classified to the point that even some of the higher-ups don't know what she can do. Now, the name of Yuki's technique is Star Rage, and just like how real stars have tons and tons of mass, Star Rage allows Yuki to add virtual mass to her body. If we take a second to explain what this means, usually mass is measured in kilograms, meaning that a 10 kg object by default has more mass than a 1 kg object. For a second, let's imagine that both of these objects are flying towards you at the same speed. The one that has more mass is going to do more damage, and if we add even more mass to this, then it might kill you. Yuki's power takes advantage of this basic rule by allowing her to add mass to both herself and her Shikigami called Garuda. The great thing about this virtual mass is that it doesn't slow Yuki down, so she's able to just move around like normal while landing these heavy physical attacks. According to Kenjaku, Yuki's mass is so unfathomable that it makes her immune to certain curse techniques. The best example of this is that Kenjaku had a curse spirit, and in theory it might have been able to beat Yuki. To put it simply, this curse can manipulate reality to an extent, and you can't fight against it with just brute force. Its power works by targeting someone with its curse technique, and then using imaginary concepts to move that target out the way. Despite that, Yuki's mass was so overwhelming that the curse spirit couldn't do anything when she attacked. For that reason, curse techniques that target someone, they're probably not going to work on her, although she can still be hurt by domain expansions and by physical attacks. Remember, because Yuki's mass is virtual, it means that even when the virtual mass is high, her durability is still the same as it always was. Therefore, physical attacks can still damage her, but concepts shouldn't be able to target her. The final thing to say about Star Rage is that there is genuinely no limit to how much mass she can add, but when it goes past a certain point, the weight does begin to affect her. If Yuki was to just keep increasing it without any care for herself, then yeah, her body would eventually reach the mass of an actual star. If she then kept pushing even more than that, her body would collapse into a black hole, and yeah, at that stage, she becomes the most destructive force in JJK. Realistically, not even Gojo, Sukuna, Deborah, or anyone could destroy a whole planet, but Yuki has that potential, and if she doesn't try to suppress the black hole, then genuinely everyone on Earth would die. Now, what I'm about to say might be controversial, but this next technique is factually one of the best in this series, but the problem is no one talks about it, no one rates it, because the user was terrible. The technique I'm referring to doesn't have an official name, but we'll call it Duplication for this video, and it allows the user to create 4 exact clones of themselves, and then at any point, the user can transfer their consciousness into one of the clones. According to Gojo, each of the different clones are just as real as the original, and so yeah, essentially you have a fail-safe system where if the user's main body is in danger, he can keep switching bodies at will to guarantee his own safety. Let's just imagine for a second what it would look like if Yuta copied this technique. To have 5 real Yutas jumping you at the same time, yeah, that would be unsurvivable. If we were to rank this power, in the hands of someone with a lot of natural talent, this could make them a special grade threat because you can essentially create your own army, 5 copies of yourself, and if you are inherently powerful, you know, like born like Sukuna or like Yuta or someone like that, then there's no denying that 5 Yutas could take over a country. Also, the ability to transfer your consciousness at any time so you can never truly be killed as long as you keep like 1 clone in a safe location. Yeah, man, I mean, there's a lot of different ways this can be used, obviously, but I think overall, in the hands of a good talent, this is a special grade curse technique. Moving on, the 5th technique in this video belongs to Charles Bernard, and for context, Charles is one of the very few sorcerers who doesn't have Japanese ancestry. Although he was born in Japan, we know that both his parents are French, and for most of his life, Charles had no connection to cursed energy. However, everything changed when the Culling Games began, since Kenjaku rewired Charles' brain and turned him into a real sorcerer. This is how Charles discovered his curse technique, and it was described by Sukuna as being Precognition. As the name suggests, the user of Precognition can see their opponent's future, but only when certain conditions are fulfilled. The first condition is that they need to draw blood from their opponent, and luckily for Charles, his technique comes with a weapon. This comedically giant pen is known as the G-Warstaff, and its name is a direct reference to certain pens in real life. When Charles uses this pen to draw someone's blood, he can then see 1 second into their future, and he can increase the number of seconds by drawing more and more blood. During a fight, this gives Charles a quick preview of how his opponent is about to move, allowing him to dodge attacks that usually would have landed. However, the drawback is that Charles doesn't see the full picture. All he sees is his opponent's movements in the near future. So if they were to stay out of his sight and hide in his blind spots, then the technique can't really help him. I guess the best way to compare it is that if you look at Sir Nighteye in My Hero Academia, when he sees the future, he sees everything. He sees not just one person, but the entire surrounding. Whereas for Charles, all he sees is that single person's movement. What makes Charles interesting, just like the other awakened sorcerers, is that their curse techniques seem to be directly related to their profession. For instance, when it comes to Higuruma or Takaba, their techniques are directly related to being a lawyer or being a comedian, and when it comes to Charles, his technique is related to his dream of becoming a manga writer. If you've ever read a comic, you know that sometimes your eyes might get drawn to the next page even when you haven't reached it yet, and yeah, sometimes when that happens, you end up spoiling something major. This technique works in a similar way in that Charles marks his victims with a panel from a comic, and that represents the near future. And so by looking at it, I guess he's spoiling the next page of Jujutsu Kaisen. Following this, the next sorcerer is Haruta, who's the guy that was about to kill Mahoraga until Sukuna rudely interrupted him. In Season 2, Haruta's technique was revealed to be miracles, and it's a power that even he isn't fully aware of. The way it works is that when Haruta experiences small miracles in his everyday life, his technique forces him to forget those miracles and then saves them for another time. An example of a small miracle would be looking at your phone and seeing that the time is 11:11, or maybe going to buy your favorite sandwich or something and realizing that it's the last one. The purple markings on his face represent the amount of miracles he has stored up, and each time he uses one, the markings then become empty. During the Shibuya incident, Haruta used all 6 of his miracles when fighting against Nanami and against Kugisaki, and his technique is the only reason why he wasn't killed there and then. Haruta himself does know that he's a lucky person, and he is to an extent aware that his technique makes him lucky, but what he doesn't know is that there's a limit. From his point of view, he just thinks he has infinite luck, and that's why he wasted a miracle trying to aura farm against Kugisaki. What I thought was interesting though is that when Haruta fought against Megumi, we can see that there are no miracles left, but then just as Mahoraga was about to crush him, Sukuna swoops in to save his life. This was an incredibly lucky thing to happen, and it wasn't because of his technique apparently, but of course, Sukuna being Sukuna, he still killed him in the end. Now, someone else who died a horrible death was Junpei, also known as the classmate that Yuji never had. I feel confident saying that we all at some point thought Junpei would join the main crew, and personally, I would have loved to see him and Megumi teaming up. I don't know, there was just potential there. There was potential for Potential Man to be a little bit of a teacher to Junpei. For context, Junpei's curse technique is poison, and it comes with a free Shikigami called Moondregs. As you can see, Moondregs is a jellyfish, and in terms of durability, it's pretty tough since it tanked Yuji's punches without any problem. By wrapping people in its tentacles, Moondregs can then secrete the poison into their system, and according to Mahito, the deadliness of Junpei's poison can be increased over time. In fact, Mahito himself helps Junpei to artificially improve like super quickly, but of course this wasn't his cap. Like Junpei could have got way better had he survived and gone to Jujutsu High. From everything we saw in Season 1, Junpei used his poison to paralyze people and knock them out, but it's not hard to imagine, him developing a fatal poison that could kill cursed spirits or even humans. To me, I thought this had potential to be a grade 1 level technique, given that Moondregs is good for attack, good for defense, he can break his fall like a trampoline, and it can poison anyone who's not Sukuna's vessel. In terms of just pure design, it also just looks really cool. In fact, I would say that besides Mahoraga, I don't think there's many Shikigami that look better than this. Anyhow, the 8th curse technique in this video is called Inverse, and if used correctly, it might save the user from getting jumped. The way it works is that when Inverse is activated, damage that would usually be fatal suddenly becomes harmless. In fact, the user of this technique we all saw, he was thrown off a 40-story skyscraper, he was scratched in the face by a divine dog, he was punched by Yuji at nearly full power, and he was also thrown into a building, and after all of that, he was perfectly fine. This is because the stronger an attack is, the weaker it feels to him, and the weaker an attack is, the stronger it feels. What this means is that unlike certain techniques, inverse is a power that you should never reveal to your opponent, because as long as they don't know how it works, then the likelihood is they'll just keep hitting you with stronger and stronger attacks. Now, it should be said that there is a maximum limit to the technique, meaning that when an attack is just so ridiculously powerful, inverse won't be able to reverse the damage. At the same time, inverse also has a minimum limit, meaning that although weak attacks can hurt him, they still have to have a basic amount of force. Megumi put it best when he said that inverse has to have a minimum limit, otherwise, the user could be killed by air resistance or a gust of wind. If there was no minimum, that's what would happen. Overall, this technique is mostly good. Like, the only real risk you have is if you come up against someone with a high battle IQ like Megumi, or if you come up against someone who is like special grade level. Besides that, in most situations, it's a great power to have. Now, the final techniques in this video belong to two of the original JJK characters, and when I say original, I mean that they were introduced way before Yuji, Megumi, and a good chunk of the main cast. The sorcerers I'm referring to are Miguel and LaRue, who were part of Geto's team during JJK Volume 0. To properly explain their powers, we need to get into spoilers for the final battle of JJK, so yeah, if you don't want to know about that, then this is the time to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and then just leave. For everyone else, LaRue and Miguel reappeared after a very long time for the final battle against Sukuna, and their techniques are called Heart Catch and Prayer Song. If we start off with Prayer Song, I can confidently say there isn't another technique like this, because to activate his power, Miguel needs to start dancing. Through this dancing, Miguel produces a beat while he's fighting, and according to Gojo, the beat weakens Miguel's opponents while strengthening himself. And I should point out that physically Miguel is already one of the toughest sorcerers. Anyway, Prayer Song also has a secondary ability, which is that it drives curses away, and during a fight, this makes it very simple for Miguel to dodge attacks from other sorcerers. On this page, Sukuna fired a bunch of dismantles at Miguel, but he just casually avoided all of them by breakdancing. It's the combination of strengthening himself, weakening his opponents, and also driving their curses away, all of that combines to make things like this possible. Meanwhile, when it comes to LaRue's Heart Catch technique, this is one that manifests a giant hand made of cursed energy. In a way, it does have similarities to Junichi Zenin's technique, but I guess the main two differences is that, first of all, it's just one fist instead of 1,000, and secondly, LaRue has to use it for grabbing things instead of just punching things. In chapter 255, LaRue impressively grabs Sukuna and then slams him into a wall, and you could tell the force was intense because it created this hand-sized crater. Against weaker villains, I reckon this move would have done some real damage and might have even killed them, but against Sukuna, his giant hand got sliced in half. What's interesting though is that when the hand is destroyed, 10% of the damage gets transferred to LaRue's main body, although I have to say 10% isn't that bad, and considering that LaRue is pretty durable anyway, he doesn't have to worry about losing his real hand. It's also worth pointing out that as long as he has cursed energy, LaRue can keep regenerating the giant hand even after it's been destroyed. We also have to mention that LaRue can use the virtual hand on himself for whatever you might be imagining, because in this one panel, he uses the hand to pull his own body out the way of these rocks. The final thing to mention about Heart Catch is that once LaRue has successfully grabbed someone at least one time, he then has the secondary ability to grab their attention as well. By extending his real hand, LaRue forced the King of Curses to just look in his direction, with Sukuna commenting how he couldn't take his eyes off him. This distraction caused him to waste precious seconds, and it allowed Yuji to black flash him square in the chest. Just before we end the video, I wanted to quickly mention Utahime's technique as well, sort of as a bonus I guess, and this is a power that briefly amplifies cursed energy. The name of this technique is Solo Forbidden Area, and we saw its full potential right before Gojo's fight with Sukuna. The way it works is that within this small area, Utahime can target sorcerers, including herself, and boost their cursed energy output and their cursed energy reserves. As a quick reminder, cursed energy reserves are the total amount of CE that someone has, whereas the output is the amount of CE that they can release in a single attack. Utahime's technique increases both of these things temporarily, and in chapter 223, she used it on Gojo. On that occasion, she enhanced the effectiveness of Solo Forbidden Area by doing cursed chants, dancing, gestures, and even adding music from Gakuganji. By combining all of this, her technique was working at 120%, and when you factor in Gojo doing his own chants as well, this is why his output of Hollow Purple was 200%. If I'm being brutally honest, the idea of a technique that boosts curse energy is a great idea, but I just think that Utahime's technique specifically is not that good. It requires way too much setup, like you have to be close to her, and it only works for like a brief moment. From what we saw, Gojo only received the boost for his single attack, and after that, Utahime's technique didn't have any lasting effect. There are a few moments during the Gojo Sukuna fight where a boost of cursed energy would have been useful, and Gojo had to resort to doing his own cursed chants, but it would have been helpful if Utahime could have helped from a distance, I guess, but that wasn't possible because you have to be very close to her, and because of that, I just think it's not very practical. Anyway, people, let me know in the comments down below, what was your favorite technique that only appeared one time? And there were a few that I left out in this video, and the reason for that is that I am thinking of doing a video about the worst curse techniques, because there are quite a few really bad ones that only appear once. So yeah, that was the idea, but we'll see if I do it. I think I will do it because it is pretty interesting. But yeah, let me know if you want that in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching, and until the next one, peace out.